This is a defensive crouch. This is what happens if you're depressed and anxious, right? This stance is, I'm willing to take what the world throws at me, right? And that might be the trials and tribulations that are associated with the hierarchy, because that's a tough battle in and of itself, but it also might be all the terrible unknown things that are going to come your way. And what's the right attitude? Is stand the hell up with some courage and take it, right? Voluntarily, with courage. So it's actually a stance of maximal vulnerability. Vulnerability adopted voluntarily. That's what the crucifix represents, just so you know. It represents the willingness to take on the suffering of the world voluntarily. The whole thing. And that's associated with what's ever at the top of the hierarchy. So the idea is the best possible strategy that you have to be successful across the set of all possible hierarchies is to maximally accept the fact that you're vulnerable. To accept that as the price of being. And that's the essential message. But it's not only the message of Christianity, by the way. You see this sort of idea expressed in all sorts of religious structures. I mean, the Taoists, to return to them, say, well, where should you be in the world? The world is made out of the catastrophe of chaos and the tyranny of order. Where do you stand in that place? And the answer is, with one foot in chaos and one foot in order. That's the line down the middle. That's the Tao. That's the way. That's the point of meaning. It's the same place that's at the center of a cathedral. It's the same idea. You stand there because you're secure, because you have tradition and the power of your civilization behind you. And you have one foot in chaos because that's not enough and never will be. And the instinct that puts you there is the instinct of meaning. And you can use that as a guide. And it's a deep neurological instinct. It's not some epiphenomena. It's the most real thing there is, as far as I can tell. And associated with that is a certain attitude towards life, which is to venture courageously out into the unknown, is to put yourself on the line, right? To heed the call of adventure, to risk yourself voluntarily. You have no choice anyways, right? Because you're in this all the way. There's no out that isn't death. The full catastrophe is at your feet. You can't evade or escape that. But what you can do is choose how it is that you're going to confront it. And so rule one is to stand up straight with your shoulders back and to manifest. And this is the thing that's so amazing about this, I think. And that what lends a kind of ultimate reality to the idea of positioning yourself properly. You might say, well, let's presume that you're a very pessimistic person or a very realistic person. And you say, well, what's the fundamental reality of life? You say, well, it's suffering and malevolence. It's like, okay, it's a hard argument to forestall. But I don't think it's true. It's true, but it's not the final truth. The final truth is, despite the fact that that's true, the ability of the human spirit to prevail is more powerful than death and evil. That's the truth. And you know that. You know that. First of all, you know that because you're ashamed that you're not everything you could be. You know that because the people that you admire are people who manifest courage in the direst of straits. And you know that as well because when you meet people like that and you're not like that, they shame you. That speaks to your deepest possible instinct. You know what you could be. And you know, too, that you see people contend with situations that are so difficult that it's truly a miracle that they can contend with them. You know, and I think of people who work in funeral homes. That's a good example. That's hard, right? That's death and grief every day. And it's not something that you can avoid. It's like it's right there. It's as real as it can possibly be. I'll tell you a story about that. I had a client who was very afraid of being alive, and she wanted to sleep all the time, and she took sleeping pills and all sorts of other things so that she could evade the burden of being conscious. And she was a very good dreamer, and she wasn't doing well in university, and she had a dream one night that a gypsy told her that she was actually lucid during her dreams, by the way, and she could ask her dream characters what they meant, and they would tell her, which was something I'd never seen anyone else manage. In any case, she dreamt of this gypsy that she met in the forest, and the gypsy told her that unless she could learn to work in a slaughterhouse, she'd never finish her degree. And so she told me that story. I don't know if you know this, but the classic treatment for people who are afraid of things is to expose them to what they're afraid of, which is a good lesson if you have children, because you want to expose your children to challenges, because that makes them stronger. It has to be done voluntarily. But if you have post-traumatic stress disorder, let's say you're the victim of a vicious sexual assault by a stranger, and 2 years later you have post-traumatic stress disorder, the most effective treatment is to get you to relive the experience in as much vivid detail as you possibly can, and experience all the emotions that occurred while it was happening. And if you do that, the more upset you get when you do that, if you do it voluntarily, the faster you get better and the longer you stay better. And so it's a general rule of thumb in psychotherapy is, if someone's avoiding something, find out what they're avoiding, break it into manageable pieces, and have them voluntarily expose themselves to it, and they will be cured. And that's the dragon fight in clinical practice. Find what you most need will be found where you least want to look. Right, that's a hell of a statement. So she told me this dream, and I thought, well, I don't know how to arrange for you to work in the slaughterhouse. That doesn't seem like she wouldn't eat meat, by the way. She wouldn't go into a butcher store. I took her into a butcher store once, and she had a very catastrophic reaction. She couldn't handle it. Anyways, I said, well, we can't arrange the slaughterhouse thing. Why don't you go away for a while and come back in a week and see if you can come up with an alternative. So she came back and she said, I want to see an embalming. And I thought, oh God, okay, how the hell am I going to arrange that? So I phoned a couple of funeral homes and I said, look, I've got this person who's really afraid of death, and she had this dream, and I told them the story, and they said, no problem, bring her in. And so I wasn't looking forward to this, by the way. So we went, and she was very, very nervous, because she certainly didn't think she could handle that. And, as I said already, I wasn't exactly thrilled about it either, but in for a pound, in for a penny, in for a pound, as they say. So anyways, we went to the funeral parlor, and they showed us around, and we asked a bunch of questions, like how the hell did they cope with their jobs, because that's just a mystery to me. And they said, well, it was actually really useful for them to guide people through the process of grief, and that their experience was that had given them a renewed appreciation for life, which is, well, that would account for why they were able to do it, because it seems like a very hard job. And so we went into this room and watched this embalming, and I was about 8 feet away from this small room. It's a pretty gruesome operation, as you might imagine, and my client was sitting beside me, and I was watching her and watching the embalming as well. And for the first while, she was just looking to the side, which was, I'm not here, and I certainly can't handle that. And no blood. bloody wonder, literally. And so, but then she would take the odd glance, she'd go like this, and then look away. And then, as the minutes ticked by, but fairly rapidly, she was spending more time watching and less time looking away, until she was finally doing nothing but watching. And then at some point she asked if she could come in and put her hand on the body. And so they gave her a glove, and she did that. And then she went and sat down. And she was quite quiet about all this, and quite quiet afterwards. And, well, so what did she discover? Well, she didn't discover that death wasn't horrible. She didn't discover that. And she didn't discover that death wasn't terrifying, because it certainly was. But what she did discover was that she was a hell of a lot tougher than she thought, and much quicker than she would have believed. And she went away thinking, look at that. I did the thing I was most afraid of doing, and here I am. And not only am I not more damaged than I was, I'm actually better than I was. And so from then on, she had a reference point, right? Which is an interesting thing. I think this is why primordial people initiate especially their young men, because it sort of happens automatically with young women. They expose their young men to something absolutely terrifying, genuinely terrifying, so that for the rest of their lives they know the difference between what's actually terrifying and what's just sort of normal catastrophe. Because you really need to know that, right? Because you need to know that you can prevail. And one of the things she learned as a consequence of that exposure was that she could prevail despite the realities of life. Of course, that's what you want to teach your children, mostly by example, is that they can prevail despite the realities of life. Of course, that also means that you have to have admitted to what the realities of life are. But the thing that's so interesting about that, here's another story. So, you know the story of King Arthur and the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is the ultimate value. It's a symbol of whatever the ultimate value is. And King Arthur assembles his knights around the round table. And it's a round table because they're all equal, despite the fact that they have a king. They sit as equals at the round table. And they all decide to go off to seek for the Holy Grail. It's either the cup that Christ drank out of at the Last Supper or the cup that held his blood on the cross. It's one of those two things. It doesn't really matter. It's a symbol of what's redemptive. That's what the Holy Grail is. So it's a representation of the ultimate value. The question is, where do you go to seek out what's of ultimate value? An answer in the tale of King Arthur and the Holy Grail is that each knight entered the forest when they began their search at the place that looked darkest to them. So that's the thing, is that it's necessary, if you're going to stand up straight with your shoulders back, to confront the darkness of the world head on, to take responsibility for the tragedy of existence and for malevolence. That's what it means. That's what the Christian injunction to take the sins of the world onto yourself means. It means it's your bloody problem. And to confront Satan in the desert is the same idea, is that not only do you have to take on the tragedy of the world as if it's your responsibility, but you have to contend with the spirit of malevolence while you're doing so. And it's in doing that that you find your destiny. That's where you find the highest of possible values. And that's the call. And that's the call to the nobility of being, because you might think, well, what could possibly justify your life more thoroughly? What could make you the best player of all possible games than to take the tragedy of the world onto your shoulders and to fight with all your ability against the malevolence in your own heart?